Good morning. This is the In Context podcast. We're shooting this at Stonebridge Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My name's Keith. I'm one of the pastors here, and we have a special guest this morning. We'll get to him in just a second, but I am joined as normal by
Brandon Levering.
Brandy, you want to introduce our special guest this morning?
Steven Collier. Well, I really like Steven to introduce himself. So we have at Stonebridge, we have some outreach partners that, people serving across the globe on behalf of the gospel. And we are privileged to have with us Steven Collier, who has been serving for several years in Ukraine. And given the crisis right now, given the war that is happening there, Steven is stateside, obviously. He's sitting in the office with us. But we thought this is a unique opportunity to hear from somebody who has been living there for years, whose friends and colleagues are in the midst of this right now, and just to help us understand as Christians here in America, how do we think about this? What's really going on? How can we be praying? And just to hear from him. So, Steven, why don't you introduce yourself and talk about what you do, how long you've been in Ukraine, and so on?
Yeah, I'm just really glad to be here and just for this opportunity to share with you what's going on in Ukraine. My name's Steven Collier. My wife's name is Meg. We actually have 4 children, 3 of which were born in Kyiv, Ukraine. We've always seen our ministry as kind of an extension of Stonebridge's ministry. And we actually love their vision to come alongside every person and help them take their next step with Jesus. Right. And so a lot of the things that we do in Ukraine is along those lines. We have a lot of people in our home where we do life-on-life discipleship. We read the Bible together, we pray together, we make meals together, we even go and do evangelism together. And kind of like what we've seen God do in the last several years is raise up Ukrainians to go share the gospel in other parts of the world that really have the heart of God to see him draw a people to himself from every tribe and nation. And so over the last 5 years, there's actually 5 Ukrainian church unions that have banded together and put together a sending agency that helps and trains Ukrainians to actually go out. Our ministry is on the other side of that. We ask ourselves the question, who are sending these missionaries? Are healthy churches who care about missions, who care for their missionaries, sending them? Yeah. And so the bulk of our ministry is actually helping the church understand missions, how to prepare for missions, how to be involved in missions, how to send missionaries that are well-trained, that even down to planning knowing how to prepare a budget, things like that.
The nitty-gritty details, yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So how long have you and your wife been in Ukraine?
So we've been in Ukraine since 2012. Okay. So we spent 2 years in language school in Kyiv, and then we moved to Ivano-Frankivsk, and we spent the rest of our time in Ivano-Frankivsk since then.
And what part of Ukraine is Ivano-Frankivsk?
Ivano-Frankivsk is in western Ukraine. It's about 3 hours from any European border.
Okay, so right. Excellent. So tell us what in the world is going on. What's really going on for someone who, again, you mentioned beforehand, you've spent the entire week on the phone basically with people back in Ukraine. Help us understand the situation, what's happening, how it's impacting the lives of Ukrainians.
Well, you basically have a world power led by an autocratic dictator who's invaded a country, an independent, sovereign European nation, with, I think, the intent of trying to reestablish the Soviet Union. And the whole pretext for him entering the country is based upon fabrications and lies. I mean, he's used the argument, I'm defending ethnic Russian-speaking peoples in the East. It's the same thing that he did in Syria. It's the same thing he did in Georgia. And it was really just to be able to get into the country, kind of maneuver around so he could enter the country. Of course, no one knew that. I mean, even we didn't know exactly what his intentions were going to be. We expected him to kind of consolidate his gains in eastern Ukraine. This kind of blew us away. I mean, my week has been just heart-wrenching with a variety of different emotions, from anger to hope to grief to trusting the Lord to frustration, because just to get, I know you guys like history, so one of the pretexts for Putin invading the country is he wants to, what he calls, denazify the nation. You probably heard that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he gets that from the 1940s. You probably remember in the 1930s, if you've ever heard of the Holodomor. The Holodomor was a massive genocide of Ukrainian people. Basically, Stalin took control of the food supply.
Right. The farmers.
Yeah, and I actually visited a castle, actually, in western Ukraine, where all of the peasants around, they were given a regiment of 5 kernels of corn a day. And if they took 7, they were butchered or beaten to death. Wow. And so 10 million people died. Well, obviously, this didn't go unnoticed, and there was a resistance that took place. Right. And this resistance actually turned into the Ukrainian insurgency army. You've probably seen the pictures of the red and black flags, which is now actually a symbol of resistance, because that's actually what they did. But in 1941, they tried to establish Lviv as like an independent Ukrainian state, hoping that on the eve of Operation Barbarossa, they would actually have German support for this. But the Germans were really only interested in pitting one Slavic group against another, and so it really backfired. But because they did that and kind of turned their backs on Soviet communist autocratic rule, Putin's using that as a pretext, saying, "Okay, well now that's what they're doing now."
Oh wow!
That they see there's still these Nazis that are against my communist autocratic rule, and so I'm going to basically take over because they're a threat to me. And really, to be honest, he doesn't want to see a thriving democracy on his doorstep. Yeah. Because then his people at home can look at them and say, they have life good over there. I want some of that. And granted, in 91, when Ukraine became a nation, it wasn't like they automatically turned to a democracy that we're used to, like the republic we're currently in. Right. It was still very much influenced by corruption. And the way the Constitution is written gives a lot of powers to the president. So he can call elections, he can suspend elections, he can pay off judges to get the results he wants. Well, in 2014, you probably remember the uprising that took place, 100 people died in Maidan. The country really turned, and it really started to become more like a democracy we're used to, where there's really free elections. They replaced all the judges. They fired all the police force. They replaced them all. Wow! And so the whole idea was they want to make decisions. They wanted to decide their own destiny. They want freedom, and that's a threat to Putin.
Sure. Yeah. And so what are the measures he's been taking? I mean, we can watch it all on the news, but as one who, again, you're on the phone with people on the ground, what's happening to your friends and loved ones?
Well, right now there's another one of the pretexts for going into Ukraine was to demilitarize the country. Yeah. And so he said he was going to attack the military installations, but I think he may have started with some of that. Like a lot of the bombings initially all over the country was to take out military installations to kind of damper the response to his invasion. But actually what's happened is it didn't work according to plan, that Ukrainians put up a large resistance. And so now he's indiscriminately targeting civilians. And so he's bombing cities and towns and infrastructure. And I think it's going to get worse, actually.
Yeah, and it's a direct violation of just war, right? I mean, it's rule number 1 in just war is don't go after civilians. It's combatants on combatants, so it's really pretty
yes,
heinous.
which is why the UN is currently reviewing war crimes.
Right.
Because actually what he's done is he's like blocked off, I mean, in a place like Mariupol in the south, he's actually blocked off the ability for civilians to get out by bombing the train stations. And so that's what he's doing now. He has a whole destroy Ukrainian morale plan, like scorched earth idea for his next steps. And so I believe it's going to get worse. It's actually been frustrating to see the response, and I understand geopolitically it's difficult to just intervene, but I think that there is an illusion that this isn't coming to a neighborhood near you, you know, and that's what we're seeing there. That if Ukraine falls, the Poland, Moldova, Sweden, the Baltics, all these places are next. And what is the alternative? I mean, I heard a reporter say recently, what is the alternative? We're going to sit here and watch like we're going to a drive-in movie. And, you know, as this reporter said, with our popcorn and watch this all go down. Yeah. And so it's been really, I had a range of emotions this week, from like anger to frustration to hope to grief. But yes, like you said, I have been on the phone a lot. I know that we only see in part and we prophesy in part, but when Jesus comes, like he'll reveal all. And so I've just been trying to do what I can from here to encourage, remind people of the gospel, how this is our friends feel, on the one hand, they feel alone, and on the other hand, they know that God is with them, and they know that there's tons of people around the world praying for them. And so it's actually been really encouraging to me that for the longest time, some churches in Ukraine have been really complacent, and they're just rising up all over the place, and they see it as their role in this war to help alleviate suffering. And so they, many churches in Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, they've opened up their sanctuaries. They stripped down their sanctuaries. They took out all the chairs, and they put down mattresses, and they've bought supplies. They're teaching first aid. They're getting water and food. So our two churches in Ivano-Frankivsk, for example, and in Dolina, they've done that. They've stripped down their sanctuaries. Our church in Ivano-Frankivsk currently has 40 refugees there now. That they're looking for more apartments to host more, because they're just being flooded with refugees coming in.
Well, one of the questions that I would be interested to know is, I think the thing that I read last week about Russia had been trying to cut off the internet access, but then Elon Musk donated
satellites
use,
into place or something like that.
But in the past, because even in the Gulf War, when the Gulf War started, I remember watching everything on TV as a middle school student and being like, man, it's crazy that we can see this stuff. But what's happening now is even more advanced, because now everything, not only are we in touch with some of what's going on over there, but they have communication, like we're interconnected. So is it more difficult, like from your perspective of being not there physically, but having a lot of connectivity? You think it's more difficult now with the level of connectivity and ease of access? Is it helpful, or is it kind of a double-edged sword?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think I've been really torn being here, because on the one hand, we have our family safe and we're far from the fighting. On the other hand, like our heart just goes out to people that we know and love there, that are all going through a very difficult time. When we have friends in Kyiv that are having a really hard time getting out. Some are stuck. I know people in Kharkiv they're basically stuck. They have nowhere to go. And some people are like, well, you could just get in a car and drive to Poland. It's not that simple.
Right.
Well, your sister-in-law spent, 50 hours on the border? Trying to get out.
Yes. Yes, and that's actually once you get to the border. That's not like the trip that you've made. Our thankfully, our apartment in Ivano-Frankivsk has kind of been an open door. So people have been coming in and out of that, people that we know. And we were just like, please use whatever you can there. I think there's still even food in the freezer. so use what's there. We feel so helpless here.
Just for context for those listening, you and your family came back to the States last summer for a planned home assignment, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Lord willing, we actually hope to return in June. We don't know what that will look like. It'll most likely be helping refugees. We hope to actually get back in the country in June, but we don't know yet. And so we're just waiting, praying, hoping.
Yeah.
But yes, there's lots of friends that we know trying to get out, and so we've been doing the best we can. There was a friend of my sister-in-law who just talked to me about finding a place in Dolina, and we have friends in Dolina, so I called a friend in Dolina, and they're going to host them.
Oh, that's cool.
And so, just some of that interconnectivity is helpful.
Sure.
It's just really hard to be on this end. It feels like a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, totally. So what would you say to Christians who are sitting stateside? You described a little bit about how the church is responding in Ukraine and just embracing this as an opportunity to serve and alleviate suffering. For those of us sitting across the ocean watching whatever news channel or social media news feed, how should Christians think about this? How should we be praying about this? What perspective can you help us gain?
Well, number one, I think it's important for us Christians to call out lies and deceit. But we need to be careful that it really is lies and deceit. And so I think we shouldn't just jump in and broadcast stuff and post things on Facebook if we haven't actually talked to somebody who knows or researched it well enough to know.
An overnight expert on Ukraine.
So I think it's important to know what the truth is.
Yeah.
And we ultimately know that the wisdom of God is what we need, that we need to know what the truth is. But we also need to proclaim it when it comes out. So that's number one.
Any tips on sorting that out? You get different, for whatever reason, so much of the internet has become kind of this factory of disinformation. And some of that is intentional on the part of these world actors of how do we sitting there, people Googling what Kyiv, where it is and trying to kind of make sense of this. Are there any tips you have for sorting truth from falsehood?
Sure. This is one of them. I mean, talking to people that have actually been there on the ground who know the situation well. Right. I mean, that's a good start. Yeah. I mean, and that's where I would follow up with, if you haven't been there and you're here, talk to some people that actually are there. I've been following reporters. They've actually been asking really, really good questions that are on the ground. They're primarily UK reporters. But I would go that route, talking to people that are actually on the ground. I think the other thing for us Christians is we see them, the churches, reaching out and helping to alleviate suffering. I think we should be a part of that.
Right.
I think if we know people in Ukraine, send them letters, remind them of the gospel, tell them that we're praying for them, that we're with them. Talking to our representatives here about, okay, what is your take on the Ukrainian situation? Are you and kind of putting pressure on them to actually help in this situation? Sometimes their hands are tied. I get that, but I think that's our role.
Yeah, that's good. Specific ways we should be. I mean, we can answer this question just simply from listening to what you've been talking about. But in terms of how to pray for Ukraine, are there more specific ways? Because I think that's, it's one thing to change our Facebook icon and put the Ukrainian flag on it, right? Which, solidarity is great. How do we actually put that solidarity into practice through prayer?
Well, I think number one, if you have some people that pray specifically for them, and you could even ask them and that's what I've been doing all week. Like, how can I lift you up to the throne of God this week? Yeah. Like, what is actually going on? I mean, I just talked to a friend yesterday, and they spent the last several days in a bomb shelter. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the difference is, like you're talking about, not having passive prayer, please bless them, please protect them, that kind of thing, because we don't know what the results are going to be.
Right. Sure.
Like, it's better if we actually know some specifics, so we know how to pray specifically, so we expect God to actually answer specifically.
Yeah. And so what are some of those specific requests? And obviously you don't need to divulge any personal details of your friends over there, but what are some of the things they're asking you to pray for?
I think one of them is certainly international, like, solidarity. You're talking about putting things into practice. There's a lot of talk going on in the EU and the UN, but it seems to be all talk.
Like slow motion.
We know wild. What's going on there, and it's going to get worse. Okay, so I'm waiting for an action plan. Right.
It is,
and I think that Ukrainians are too. Even believers there are wondering, is anyone going to come actually help? Mm-hmm. And Ukrainians and Russians, for that matter, Slavic peoples tend to be people of action. Mm-hmm. And we don't tend to be. We tend to think that we can solve a lot through a reason, a lot through having a conversation, which is what's happening in the EU. A lot of conversations are going on, and they're good, but they're not going to help Ukraine. Yeah. And the solidarity they've gotten so far is, we're in solidarity with you, but we're going to send troops to Poland. Well, that's not helpful. Yeah. And so Ukrainians are feeling that. They're feeling practically alone. Yes, they are getting some help. It's not like they're not getting any help. They are getting some.
But it just seems like this strange trickle and everything seems like a week or two too late.
Yes. And so even believers are asking not only for prayer for that, but to actively be involved in pressuring them to come help. They're also, many are scared, but they're trusting God in this picture, knowing that He's in control of this. This is not a surprise to Him at all. Right. And that's actually been encouraging to me, that they've actually been examples to me.
That's cool.
Just of trusting the Lord and actually doing their part of helping out. And so that's also how we could help and practically and pray practically that they're able to get humanitarian aid, because they're on the verge of a humanitarian crisis there. And third, I think they would just pray that God sustains them through all of this, that He gives them direction on how they can help, and even how missionaries can help. Like, I think that, right now our team is in Poland figuring out, okay, they're also refugees in a way. And how can we as missionaries actually help refugees alleviate some of this suffering, point them to Jesus?
Yeah. That's great. I would imagine some folks listening to this are curious, like, if I wanted to send a gift or something, like get involved monetarily, who in the world does one send something like that to? And there can be there's no limit of organizations that might say they're helping Ukraine, but how do you even know? For you, again, as someone who's been there, someone who's working there, do you have any tips for how to discern that kind of question? Folks who are wanting to donate something to either alleviate suffering or whatever.
Well, for those who know someone there, it would mean a lot if they actually heard from you, and if you could actually perhaps send something directly to them,
to your friends.
If you don't know anyone there, actually, there's a lot of organizations that are raising money right now that go directly to humanitarian aid. 100% of it goes to provide food and water and clothing and places to stay. Even send, I think it's send.org, something like Send or Help Ukraine right now, that 100% of proceeds goes to that.
Yeah.
So that's a way to help.
That's great.
I can add a link to that in the show notes.
Excellent. That's great.
Yep.
Anything else you wish people understood about this situation, or what God is doing or could be doing through this situation?
Well, I'll give you one example, and and this is where the blessing and a curse kind of comes in. There was an example in Bucha where I was telling you that there's been complacent churches in Ukraine, and there was a church that actually rose up. They took in 120 refugees into their tiny church building, and they were having services like 4 times a day. Some people came to the Lord.
Wow.
That was on February 24th. On the 28th, they were bombed, where the place was leveled. And so we're not sure
what happened
to them. Haven't heard from them. And so on the one hand, like, praise the Lord, people are coming to the Lord. And yet it's like, I don't know if they're still living.
Yeah.
And I think it's been hard for me to even sleep at night. Actually, I'll get up in the middle of the night just thinking, okay, are my friends going to make it through the day?
Yeah.
Right.
And pray for them, and then try to go back to sleep. And
so
it's been it's been that kind of week.
And one thing we always try and do on this podcast is kind of take a step back and think, how does Scripture inform the way we think about and process? And so I'll just throw this out to any of us, but what are either some passages or some theological truths of Scripture that give us perspective for processing, praying, at a higher level of what God is doing or promises to do in the end? Like, how does that help us?
Well, I've actually reflected a lot on Psalm 46, that God is our refuge and ever-present help in times of trouble, and that there are certain things that are concrete in this passage. There's certain things that are really uncertain also, like the kingdoms are raging, the arrows are flying, the chariots are blazing, and that could be very unsettling. That can be very frustrating. It can be very uncertain, and yet there's things that are concrete there, that are unmovable. That God is our refuge, and He's always there in times of trouble. And that His kingdom is sure. It's not going anywhere. It's not dependent upon the temporary, circumstantial things going on. And that He will reign on the earth. It says He will be exalted in the earth. And nothing is going to stop that. Ultimately, that whole passage is, in our response, is the be still and know that I am God. The, hey, relax. You don't have to control the situation here. That God has this in charge. He's in charge of this. He speaks and the earth melts. He's not even moving. He just speaks the words and right off of the bat, the earth is subject to His words. And I think that's been really encouraging to us. I'm reminded of that almost every day, because even I can be like, okay, I'm anxious about this. And God says, be anxious for nothing. I'm in charge. And also I think too, it's a reflection of Him. If we are relaxed because He's in charge, we actually point people to Him. And I think of one of the kind of verses that comes to mind for our ministry comes from Philippians 4, that what you have heard, received, learned, and seen in me, put those things into practice. And he's talking about, Paul is talking about his own sanctification. As I'm becoming more like Christ, as I'm taking every thought captive, I'm becoming more like Christ. You follow my example in that. And so I think that's a passage that comes to mind also.
That's really good. Yeah, that psalm, what's so often, or simply metaphorical for us, right? There's nothing metaphorical about it for the Ukrainian experience right now. And yet I love that climax. It's the Lord's presence. The Lord of hosts is with us, and He's the one who breaks the bow, shatters the spear, so we can be still. Psalm 46, that's excellent.
Yeah, that is good. And for me, it's just, I've been in Daniel a lot, so you get the same concept there. The Lord is sovereign over the kingdoms of men, and He gives them to whomever He chooses. So no matter what motion of history is happening between nations, God's not out of control, right? People are certainly out of control. God's not. But back to what we talked about earlier, the thing that's always most disappointing to me is everybody, even Christians, seem to have a very developed opinion of the world side or the political side. It would always be much nicer to see Christians respond first in trust and prayer and asking, like, how can we help? And then not presuming that prayer is a secondary means of help.
No, that's like the most powerful thing we can do.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, I've been reading the book of Ezekiel to the kids, and which is very interesting because Ezekiel has a lot of interesting parts, and it's really changed my perspective talking to little kids about it, because they ask questions that I just like, okay, I'm not gonna, like, so what he's cooking over what? But what I have gotten from Ezekiel is, even in the first few chapters, no one can move unless the Spirit moves them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're so often, even we have this tendency, okay, I have to act, I have to do something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think oftentimes, like, that, and it goes back to that, be still, know that I'm God. Right. Are we being sensitive to the Spirit of God to actually lead us, that he's still in the midst of all of this?
Yes. Right. He didn't slip off of his throne last week.
He didn't fall off his throne and somehow everything's out of control now. Like, he's still in control. And so I think we should actually quiet our lives and our thoughts to actually dwell on the fact, are we being sensitive to the Spirit of God? And actually, he will tell us what we should be doing.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we have that oftentimes in reverse.
Yeah, we do, and then, that's so good.
So to distill, then, things I've heard you say, like, if we were to chop this down, again, in short bursts for those who are listening to this, as a Christian, primarily would be careful where you're getting your information from. If it's possible to speak with someone who actually knows what's going on and has connections, that's great. Pray according to God's power, and make that a primary. But also reach out to legislators if it's possible, and just continually ask, what more could we do as a concerted effort to help what's going on over there?
Yes.
Okay.
That's great.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, man.
Thank you for your service over there, for you and Meg and your family. That's just an amazing gift and a privilege for us to be able to partner with you guys that way. But thank you for your advocacy for your beloved brothers and sisters there, and for taking time to help us better understand that. And we're just really grateful.
Well, I'm so glad to join you guys. So thank you.
Yeah. How long are you here till?
June? Till June, Lord willing.
Yeah, you should jump in with us maybe a couple more times.
Let's do it.
We'll pick your brain
right.
as this thing goes on. But if you're listening this morning, Steven and Meg are here pretty consistently on the weekends if they're not somewhere else. So if you go to Stonebridge and you see them, maybe just stop, take a moment to encourage them, pray for them. But even if you don't see them, pray for them, pray for what's happening in Ukraine. If you have any other questions, you can always ping those to us. We'd be happy to ask him and Meg, how can we be best praying for them and for their brothers and sisters over there. But thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you next week. See ya.